Imagine walking alone through a forest where the soil is so torn, so violently reshaped, that even a century later nothing feels alive. The air is still. The trees stand crooked like broken ribs. As midnight approaches, something begins to stir beneath your feet. Some describe it as a hum, others as a vibration, but many say it sounds like a pulse, like the heartbeat of something buried, something watching. In Verdun, the past isn't gone, it's waiting. On certain nights it wakes up. Before we step into this nightmare written into the earth, take a second to subscribe to the History Sage. It helps keep these forgotten stories alive, and trust me, the one you're about to hear is unlike anything you've ever seen in a history class. Verdun, even the name feels heavy, as if the word itself carries the weight of the dead. During World War I, this place became one of the most brutal killing grounds the world has ever known. 9 months of non-stop fighting. 60 million artillery shells. Entire hills turned into dust and bone. Soldiers described the battlefield as hell without flames, a place where the living envied the dead. And yet, even after the war ended, something strange refused to disappear. Travelers, night guards, hikers, and even French officials, people with no reason to invent ghost stories, began reporting the same chilling thing, that Verdun was not silent. That when the clock slipped past midnight, the battlefield seemed to come alive again. One man, an engineer assigned to survey the forest in the 1920s, claimed he heard the slow, steady tramp of marching feet behind him. When he turned, expecting to find lost soldiers or patrolmen, he found no one. The footsteps continued anyway, circling him, closing in, then fading into the woods. Who walks where no living army remains? Decades later, a group of hikers camped near Fort Douaumont reported hearing metallic clinks echoing across the darkness, like rifles being loaded, like bayonets snapping into place. They thought it was a nighttime training drill, but none were scheduled, and the nearest military unit was miles away. What training exercise repeats commands in German from 1916? Stories like this have appeared again and again from people who'd never met, never read each other's accounts, never had anything to gain. But to understand why Verdun might echo after midnight, we need to step back into the living nightmare that created it. In February 1916, German forces launched one of the most ambitious offensives in military history. Their plan was simple and terrifying: bleed France dry. Verdun was chosen because of what it meant: symbol, legacy, national pride. If Verdun fell, France's spirit might fall with it. French General Philippe Pétain arrived and issued an order that became a national vow: they shall not pass. But vows alone couldn't stop what came next. For days, the sky opened like a steel hurricane. Artillery shells fell so constantly that soldiers said they forgot what silence sounded like. One survivor recalled the ground shaking so violently that dead bodies bounced as if trying to rise again. Another said the air tasted like blood and stone. Another wrote that the night would glow orange, as if the earth itself were on fire. And yet, even in this inferno, something stranger began happening. Soldiers on both sides described hearing voices calling their names from shell craters, voices of men who had already died. A French medic wrote in his diary that, while searching for survivors, he heard a man begging for help from a ditch. When he reached it, the ditch was empty. The footprints stopped abruptly, as if the man had been erased from the mud. What happens to a place where thousands die in minutes? What kind of imprint does that leave? By summer, the battlefield had become so warped by explosions that maps became useless. Hills vanished overnight. The forests turned into stumps. The dead were buried, uncovered, reburied, then blown apart again. Verdun wasn't a battlefield. It was a blender of human souls. And in the middle of this chaos stood Fort Douaumont, a fortress that became the beating heart of the horror. German troops captured it early, thinking it would be a quick victory. But the fort became a tomb. A single explosion inside killed nearly 700 German soldiers instantly. Survivors later said the cries inside the smoke-filled corridors didn't sound human. And long after the war, visitors exploring Douaumont reported hearing faint murmurs behind the stone walls, as if someone were still trapped inside, calling from a place no rescue team could reach. Then came the night in 1931, when 2 forestry workers passing by the fort claimed they heard men shouting orders in French and German. They swore it sounded like a battle drill. But there were no drills scheduled. When they approached the structure, the shouting stopped. The forest went dead silent, as if listening to them breathe. Years later, during World War II, Allied soldiers stationed near Verdun also reported hearing strange things, footsteps marching in formation, distant bugles, and the unmistakable rattle of machine guns coming from the woods at 3 a.m. At first, they assumed it was German troops. But reconnaissance reports confirmed the woods were empty, completely empty. Who trains an invisible army in the middle of the night? Locals developed a rule: don't walk Verdun alone after midnight. Not because of ghosts, many didn't believe in them, but because the atmosphere was wrong, too heavy, too charged. When you walk that ground, they say you feel watched, you feel measured, you feel trespassing. Even modern workers in the red zone decontamination crews who remove unexploded shells talk about strange moments. A man clearing debris near the destroyed village of Fleury claimed he heard men whispering just behind him. When he turned, a cold wind hit his face, a wind that smelled like wet gunpowder. The whispering stopped. The feeling remained. But if the dead of Verdun still speak, what are they trying to say? To answer that, we return to the battle's end. After 9 months of slaughter, when the guns finally stopped, something unimaginable happened. The French began collecting the remains of the fallen tens of thousands of bodies, French and German alike. Many were too damaged to identify. They were placed together inside the Daumont ossuary, a tomb containing more than 130,000 soldiers. To this day, if you peer through the small windows of the ossuary, you can see bones stacked in the dimness. Femurs, skulls, ribs. Soldiers who once fired at each other now lie side by side, indistinguishable in death. And some visitors claim this is where the strange sensations begin: a heaviness, a pressure, as if the silence inside the ossuary is louder than the battlefield outside. Tourists have fainted inside. A few claim to feel hands brushing their shoulders as if guiding them away. One American visitor said that when she whispered, "I'm sorry," the echo that answered her didn't match her voice. But here's where things take a turn, because not every midnight echo is frightening. Some are heartbreaking. A French groundskeeper in the 1970s said he often walked the ossuary grounds after closing. One night he claimed he heard someone quietly humming an old marching song, the same melody French troops sang on their way to Verdun in 1916. He followed the sound to the far wall. The humming stopped. He later admitted the moment didn't scare him. It made him cry. There's another story told quietly among older residents of nearby villages. On certain foggy nights, they say, a lone figure appears near the road leading into the battlefield wearing a faded blue coat, his head bandaged, waving weakly for help. Drivers who stop say the figure disappears as they approach, leaving only a puddle of water on the pavement. Some think he's a lost spirit. Others believe he's something else entirely, a memory repeating itself, trapped in the air like an old recording. Scientific explanations exist, of course. Sound bouncing across strange terrain, animals moving through the brush, the human brain filling silence with possibility.
Hi.
But they don't explain everything. They don't explain the synchronized footsteps heard by multiple people at once. They don't explain the voices speaking military commands from a war long over. They don't explain why so many who visit Verdun at night feel the same pressure in their chest, like the earth itself is holding its breath. Maybe the question isn't whether Verdun is haunted. Maybe the question is whether a place soaked in this much suffering can ever truly return to silence. What happens to a landscape when it absorbs the final screams of hundreds of thousands of men? What happens to the air when it has carried that much fear? Does it eventually release it? Or does it keep it, echoing it back to us when the world goes quiet? And here's the twist. In 2015, during a heat wave, parts of Verdun's soil dried enough to reveal something chilling: old trench lines, perfectly preserved beneath the surface, appearing like scars reopening on skin. Locals who saw them said the battlefield was reminding the living that it was still here, still awake, still holding what the world tried to forget. The past had risen again, not as ghosts, but as the land reshaping itself to whisper, "Remember us." Maybe the echoes people hear at midnight aren't ghosts at all. Maybe they're the battlefield itself exhaling its memories. Maybe Verdun isn't haunted by the dead. Maybe it's haunted by history. And if that's true, then the question isn't, do the echoes still happen? The real question is, How long until they happen again? Thank you for watching The History Sage. If this story moved you and if you want more journeys into the shadows of our past, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Some stories refuse to die, we bring them back to life.